Welcome to our Lexington Remembers series. Believe it or not, this is our 5th year that we have been recording residents of Lexington and learning about the history of the town and the town itself. Today we are very fortunate to have as our guest Beverly Kelley. And she is going to talk to us about F.I.S.H, an organization that has existed here in Lexington since the 70s. So Beverly, first of all, F.I.S.H, what does it mean?
Well, F.I.S.H stands for Friendly, Independent, Sympathetic Help. And it's a program that, do you want me to go into the history a little bit?
Yes.
It started in England in the late 60s, and it was brought to the United States in around 1970 or so. And Lexington's branch started in 1972. And we've been going strong ever since. In fact, we have some of our founding members were Kathy Stewart, Phyllis Nygaard, Peggy Bicknell, who actually is still an active member with F.I.S.H, Marcia Dane, and they were some of the people who originally started it in Lexington.
And so what is the purpose of this organization? All right, I mean, you have a board and you have, so what is your goal for this organization?
The goal has changed actually over the years. In the beginning, it was to provide, it's basically a transportation organization. We provide transportation to people in Lexington who have no other way to get to doctor's appointments. That's what it is now, it's just doctor's appointments. But when we started, we would take people, senior citizens, we'll take anyone now, but it started with senior citizens to hair appointments, to the library, grocery shopping, whatever was important to them. And we even had a grocery delivery service. And the little stone store up on Mass Ave, we used to go, people would call in their order there, and a F.I.S.H volunteer would go up and pick up the order and take it to the housebound person that wasn't able to get out on their own. So it's changed over the years, but now we don't have quite as many volunteers as we used to have. So it's, we will drive anyone in Lexington who doesn't have a way to get where they need to go, but only for doctor's appointments or a health-related issue.
Beverly, how did you become involved in this, and when did you become involved in F.I.S.H?
Well,
with F.I.S.H?
I have been involved since 1975, shortly after it was brought to Lexington, because I am a member of Hancock Church, and some of the founding members were Hancock Church people, and they asked me if I would be interested in being a part of it. And I was a young mother, actually I didn't even have children at the time. I started in 1975. And then once I started having a family, I would take my children with me on the rides. And I thought, well, this is good for them to see, their mother doing some volunteer work. So it was really through Kathy Stewart particularly, although I want to emphasize that there's no religious affiliation of F.I.S.H at all. Anyone can use it, irregardless of race, creed, whatever, religion. It's open to anyone who needs transportation.
Okay, so the directors over the years, you've mentioned some of them. Who were some of the others, the leaders?
Tom Taylor was we have a board of directors, and there are probably like 15 people on the board. And I was president during the 80s. I know Judy Marshall was, I believe, president for a while. Tom Taylor was. Right now it's David Horton, for those of you that might know David, he's involved in town. And I think David Wells is coming on as the next president shortly. We have an annual meeting, and I believe it's in June, and that's when the board can sometimes change. But we do have people like Donna Takis, who has been on the board longer than anyone, I believe, and she still is on the board. So it's a great group of very dedicated people who run the organization.
Beverly, I'm going to ask you now a two-part question.
Okay.
All right, first of all, how, if I wanted to volunteer to be part of F.I.S.H and to do work for F.I.S.H, how would I do that?
Okay. first of all, we would welcome you with open arms. We need volunteers. We have about 120 volunteers. And one side thing about that is that it used to be back in the 70s and 80s that it was the stay-at-home mothers that would volunteer.
Right.
But so many women are back to the workplace now. It's evolved over the years that now I would say the majority of our volunteers are retired people. And we have a lot of men now, which is terrific. They're wonderful volunteers. So the way you would volunteer is we have a number you could call. It's 781-861-9300, and we have an answering service. And you could just volunteer your services, and then someone would call you. But we do some publicity too, and I wanted to show everyone this because this is the January-February issue of the Colonial Times, and they did a wonderful article in here, complete with a photograph of the current board of F.I.S.H. And I'm sure somewhere in the article it says we need volunteers. So we do publicity in the Minuteman and the Colonial Times and just word of mouth. But if you wanted to volunteer, we certainly would encourage you to do so, anyone who's interested.
All right, now the second part of this question, say, for instance, an individual needed a ride to the hospital and so forth and so on. How would they go about, I know you mentioned a telephone number, but how would they go about connecting with F.I.S.H.?
Basically the same thing. Mary Pedrati is our answering service, and she's been with us for 10 or 15, maybe even 20 years. She runs a small little answering service out of her home, and you would call her. Again, it's 781-861-9300. And what you have to do to get a ride from F.I.S.H. is to call 2 working days ahead of time. For an example, if you wanted to if you had an appointment on a Wednesday, you would call on Monday, so 2 working days ahead. And you call Mary and you tell her who you are, where you want to go, what times you want to go, what your address is, and your phone number. Then what happens at the end of the day, or like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone F.I.S.H., we have 2 types of volunteers, and I need to explain that. We have phone F.I.S.H. and we have drivers. And so late in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, the phone F.I.S.H. will call Mary and say, okay, Mary, what calls did you get in today? And Mary will give her the list of all the people who needed a ride for 2 days ahead. And then the phone F.I.S.H. coordinates it all. And then the phone F.I.S.H. looks at a written schedule for the month that tells her, okay, on this Wednesday, I've got these 4 or 5 drivers available. They're our volunteers for the day. So then the phone F.I.S.H. calls those people and says, okay, Mrs. Smith called, she needs a ride at 2 o'clock and so forth, and fills all those rides. Then what's supposed to happen, and this would be by like 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, once the phone F.I.S.H. has scheduled everything with the driver calls the person that wants the ride, calls the client and says, okay, I'm going to be your driver on Wednesday. And they just coordinate and make sure that she doesn't need any specific help with anything like getting into the car, if she has a walker or that sort of thing. So that's basically how it works.
Will F.I.S.H. take people, like for instance, if an individual has a doctor's appointment in, let's say, Boston, do they go that far, or what does one do?
That's a good question. Again, our volunteers, we have phone F.I.S.H. and we have drivers. Drivers are broken up into 2 categories. We have local drivers and we have what we call Boston drivers. The local drivers usually drive in Lexington and any surrounding towns. The Boston drivers will go into Cambridge or certainly Boston, but we'll virtually take someone anywhere within reason. I mean, we wouldn't go to out of state, of course, at all, but if somebody has a real need, we'll take them wherever they want to go. But we would call one of our Boston drivers. And that reminds me of one other thing too. We also have a backup list of drivers. So if we get, let's say we had a day where we got 10 rides and we only had 5 drivers and the times weren't able, because you can't be 2 places at once. If you have a ride that one of the regularly scheduled drivers can't do, we call a backup list. And we have that in writing, and we say, okay, so-and-so is a backup driver, call them and see if they can do it. So we have a lot of resources to get people where they want to go.
Now, I want to bring up another issue. All right, these volunteers, they're going to drive, they're going all over the place and taking people, and they wait for them.
Most of the time they do wait for them.
Okay.
It depends on how long it is. If you're going into Boston and it's a 45-minute appointment, you usually wait. You're not going to bother driving back to Lexington. But if it's a local ride, most of the people would go home, and then that's where cell phones come in handy. You just have the client call the cell phone and say, you know, I'm done now, can you come and get me? Yeah.
Now, what about the cost of transporting these people around? Now, these volunteers assume they are responsible for the gas money and whatever else, given the price of gas now and so forth.
Right.
That's part of what people are volunteering, right?
Yes, absolutely. This is a free service for anyone living in Lexington for a medical appointment or medically related appointment. And yes, the volunteer absorbs the cost of the gas. We don't charge our clients at all. The only thing is that we do request if there's a parking fee. If the driver is going to wait for the client and she has to wait in a parking garage, for example, we would politely ask the client to pay for the parking. But other than that, there's no charge at all. No, it's totally a free service.
I think that is amazing. I hope that the people of Lexington and the F.I.S.H recipients appreciate that.
Well, that's one of the things. You get a lot of feedback from people because you're riding in the car with them for, many minutes. People are very appreciative of it, very appreciative, and that helps make us feel like we're doing something worthwhile for people. One other thing I wanted to show our viewers is these are 3 examples of the brochures that we have done over the years. And as you can see, friendly, independent, sympathetic help. And this just explains how the program works. And I believe there's a little bit about our history in there too. And I just wanted everybody to be aware that we do put these out. We usually leave some in the library, Cary Library, and other places around town. I haven't been on the board for a while, so I'm not sure where else they are, but we always made sure that Cary Library was supplied with these, so that if anyone was interested, they could pick them up. And they have, of course, our, it says since 1972, and it has our telephone number on it also.
Another thing that people out there who are thinking of volunteering as drivers and so forth, what about insurance? It's their own automobile insurance,
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
All right.
We have
Because that's a question that people would
sure.
probably ask. What happens?
Yeah,
if I'm in trouble.
We've asked ourselves that over the years, and we have had lawyers look at it, and whatever insurance people have on their cars is enough. It's just as if you were driving a friend and you had an accident. Whoever is in your car would be covered, so insurance is not an issue. You don't need extra insurance to be doing this.
All right, Beverly has some beautiful statistics regarding the number of volunteers and the number of services provided, and it's very interesting.
Well, this goes back to, it's 1983 to 1993, and I did this at the end of 1993, and it just shows the slow progression of the number of rides that we do. I mean, this is average per day, per week, per month, and per year, and it goes from 4 a day to 7 a day. Now, when you think about a ride, it's actually, one ride becomes 2 rides because you take the person over, then you have to go back and pick them up again. So, in some sense, you could double these numbers, but these are single, one-person rides. And we have, it's interesting, and I think it was the 91, 92, around that time, was the highest we ever had, and it's been decreasing since then, not rapidly. We still do, I would guess, 6 or 7 rides every day. which again, you know,
It
you
is.
double that because
Mhm.
you're going, you're taking someone over and then you're bringing them back. And so we need quite a few volunteers because sometimes they're all clustered around the noon hour, let's say, and you can't have somebody in more than one place. So we desperately need volunteers to help fill all these rides every day. But this chart is interesting because it shows the progression from 4 a day up to 7 a day, and I think it's stayed steady right now about 7 a day, but at one point it was up even like to 9 or 10 a day. So it fluctuates, it does fluctuate.
You would like volunteers, that's
We
for
would.
sure.
Yes, we need
And
both
we need,
phone fish, which is easy because you just sit in your home and do it. The driving's a little, you know, a little different. But we need both, and it's very much a balancing act. Even the publicity that we do, people read it and they think, oh, I can call F.I.S.H if I need to go somewhere. And, you know, we may get more clients than we can handle. We hope that the same number of people will say, oh, that sounds great, what a wonderful opportunity to volunteer. So we hope we can keep a balance, which we have now, we're doing well. We never turn anybody away, very, very seldom. And once in a while, an emergency will come in and someone will call 1 day ahead instead of the 2 days ahead. And we certainly try to fill those rides if we can too. So we need volunteers. If anyone is interested, please give F.I.S.H a call.
all right. And is it just for medical visits? It's not for,
No.
the shopping is not
No, we
done
don't do
now,
that
because
anymore.
that can't,
No.
right.
We
Because
just-
you're covering a
Yeah.
lot as it is, I mean, you're,
Yeah, we just don't have the volunteers to be able to do
No.
the extra things. But like, for example, the last time I drove a woman over to Leahy Clinic, and as we were leaving, she said, well, now I'd like to go to the library and to the Stop and Shop. And I said, well, you know, I really can't do that, but I could take you where you'd like to go. And she was young enough that she said, okay, if you drop me off at the library, I will just take public transportation back. And she was fine with that. So that sometimes happens, and that, you know, you want to do whatever you can to help people, but sometimes you just can't, you know.
right. And I would ask that the young mothers might even, that have their children at home during the day, might even volunteer for this, because I recall when my father-in-law was here, that a F.I.S.H driver would take him to Emerson Hospital, and she had 2 little children, and my father-in-law had the best time talking to these
Yes,
children. He
yes.
loved it. When are they coming? When's my
Right.
next doctor's appointment? So, all right, what else should we know about F.I.S.H, Beverly?
Well, I'll talk for a minute about the finances, because we
Yes.
do have expenses, although we don't charge our clients, but we have expenses. We have a telephone service, Mary Pedrati, we have the telephone line, we have paperwork, copying, mailings, postage with that. We probably on average spend $5,000 to $6,000 a year, which, you know, isn't a lot of money, but what's interesting is 20% of our money comes from churches and organizations. We have the same churches, some of them will give $100 a year, some will give $500 a year, and it varies from year to year, but quite a few of the churches in town will give us donations, and other organizations also. I think the Chinese American group gave us a donation not too long ago. So we rely on that for about 20% of our finances. The rest of it does come from clients. Our drivers are supposed to keep envelopes with the F.I.S.H address printed on the front in their glove compartments. And if anyone says, I would like to give a donation to F.I.S.H, we certainly would be happy to accept it, and then we send it along. And that reminds me of another thing too, is we have a mailing address of Hancock Church, because as I said in the beginning, the group that first started it, even though it's non-denominational, and they started at Hancock Church. So Hancock was willing to give us a mailbox there, which is very nice of them. And we have 2 other churches in town who have kind of given in-kind donations, and one is St. Bridget's, because St. Bridget's does let us have our monthly meetings there at St. Bridget's, and our annual meeting is at Pilgrim Church. So there are 3 churches that are involved in F.I.S.H. and give these sort of in-kind gifts.
These meetings that you refer to, your monthly meeting
Mhm.
and then your yearly meeting,
Mhm.
who attends these meetings and what happens at these meetings per se?
Well, the board of directors, and
Okay.
there are quite a few people on the board of directors. We've got a president, vice president, treasurer,
Would you
secretary.
mind naming them, would you?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
not at all. This is current, but it is going to change. David Horton is our president right now. David Wells is our vice president, and I believe that David Wells will be taking over at our annual meeting. Jay Luker is our treasurer. Sue Hayes is our secretary. Arthur Katz is our driver coordinator. Ruth Souza is the phone coordinator. Jim Fessler is our data coordinator. Our newsletter chairperson is Margaret Brook. Our membership chair is Sis Dexter. Our corresponding secretary is Judy Schuler. Our client statistics coordinator is Donna Takis. Our mailing coordinator is Darlene Adams. And our publicity chair is Janice Kennedy. So we have about a dozen people on our board of directors. And the types of things they will discuss is how are the finances, are we doing okay? If there have been any issues with any particular client during the last month, because we do meet on a monthly basis. Sometimes there are small issues, like if someone really needs a lot of physical help to get in and out of the car, we need to know that, but sometimes they don't tell us that ahead of time, so they have to
Right.
then call the client and say, next time, make sure you tell them that you need extra help. I can't even remember any real problems that we've ever had. I don't even ever remember an accident, a car accident we've had. Things tend to go along pretty smoothly with F.I.S.H., which is
That's wonderful.
yeah.
And let it continue. Is there anything else that we should know? I think it is a wonderful organization, and I hope that people that are watching this will realize just how much members of this community give to the care and so forth of its residents. I mean, I think that is wonderful. Now, but going along with that, do most communities have a F.I.S.H.?
That's what I was gonna say.
Okay.
You read my mind. I actually went online recently, just since I knew I was gonna be doing this, because it started in England, but it came and it spread all around this country. Even today, there are F.I.S.H. groups in Washington, let me see, I wrote down Virginia, Ohio, Connecticut, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Missouri. They're all over the country.
Mhm.
Locally, there are still several groups on Cape Cod, and Wayland and Sudbury still have groups. But a lot of them don't exist any longer because they couldn't get the volunteers anymore. I'm pretty certain Bedford used to have one and Arlington used to. But I believe they folded because as those young women went back to work, they just weren't able to stay organized enough to get more volunteers. But, we've been going strong ever since 1972 here in Lexington. And it's all because we've always had a very strong and competent board of directors to keep us going. All because of those initial people that started it. I do want to mention a couple of other names. There are 5 people who have been with F.I.S.H. Since almost the very beginning, since the early to mid-70s. Donna Takis is one. She's the longest standing member on the board, I believe. Carol Murphy is another. Peggy Bicknell, who I mentioned, she was one of the founders of the Lexington F.I.S.H. And Althea Corte and myself. We're the 5 who have been involved with F.I.S.H. the longest, almost since the very beginning. And let me see if there's anything else. One interesting trend I was told about by David Horton, the current president, is that we have a lot of brand new clients right now. It's not the same clients all the time. In fact, he was saying in 2007, there were 74 new people who used F.I.S.H. for the first time between May and December. And then in 2008, the whole year, there were 90 brand new people who were using it for the first time. So that's kind of an interesting trend. in 2009 and 2010, the same, 61 and 59 new people. So we're getting, it's not the same people over and over again that we're
Right.
driving, and that's kind of an interesting trend.
All right, what else would you? Because,
Well-
I mean, I really want people to be aware of this program, and I want people to volunteer to offer their services to this organization. And we are fortunate here in Lexington to have this organization,
yeah.
there's no question about it.
It is, I mean, we have other transportation services in Lexington, we have L'Express and we have the Ride, but this is the one that's more personal.
Yes.
It's certainly preferable to go with a friendly, smiling person than to jump in a cab and have to go to
Right,
Boston. I mean,
right.
we're all nice and friendly and,
Well,
you
you
know, we
would
give
have to be.
door-to-door service too, which is,
Yes.
which
But you
is
would
really
have
good.
to be if
Yeah.
you volunteered
Yeah.
for this, I mean, you would.
That's right.
So, if I were a client, I would like to have somebody
Yeah,
from Fish
yeah.
arrive at the door,
Mm-hmm, right, door to door.
door to
Yeah.
door.
We drive people from Brookhaven, even though they have their own bus, they don't, I think they take groups of people, but this is like
Yes.
door to door. We meet them right at the front door and take them where they wanna go, and, so we'll take anybody for a medical appointment, and you don't have to be a senior citizen. I want to make that clear too.
Oh, all right.
You can, there is one client, we have a fellow who's in his 30s, and he doesn't drive and needs our services. So, you know, we will drive anybody as long as it's a medically related appointment.
All right. Well, Beverly, I thank you so much for informing our community and enlightening our community as to the value of fish.
Well, thank you.
And we encourage all of you in the audience to become volunteers.
Yes, please.
All right,
Consider it.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you
Beverly.
for asking me. I enjoyed it a great deal.